Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. You sent over some really interesting materials this time, highlighting some, well, unexpected approaches in international immigration discussions.
Absolutely. We've been digging into a news article here, looking at certain diplomatic communications and policy shifts around how the U.S. government handles deportations of people who aren't U.S. citizens.
Right. And our goal today is really to unpack the specifics of one particular proposal, the one made to Ukraine, and sort of understand the bigger picture, the context around these efforts.
Exactly. So let's dive into that Ukraine proposal first, because it really stands out.
Okay. So the information we have says the U.S. President's administration around late January this year basically asked Ukraine to accept deportations from the U.S.
Yeah, and crucially, these weren't Ukrainians being sent back. The request was for Ukraine to take in an unspecified number of individuals who were citizens of other countries, third countries.
Which is, you know, quite something when you consider the timing.
Definitely. This request, apparently passed along by a high-ranking U.S. diplomat, went to a country in the middle of a major armed conflict with Russia.
It immediately raises questions, doesn't it? Just the practical side of things.
For sure. And just to be clear for everyone listening, when we say third country nationals, in this specific case, we mean people who aren't citizens of the U.S. or of Ukraine.
Got it. And the article does point out the obvious challenges Ukraine was facing. You know, the ongoing airstrikes meant they had no functioning airports.
Makes you wonder how that would even work logistically.
Exactly. How could they manage deportations under those conditions?
Well, the sources say a Ukrainian diplomat did acknowledge the request to the U.S. Embassy. They apparently said their government would look at it and respond.
But the bottom line is?
The bottom line is Ukraine didn't accept any third country nationals from the U.S. And there's really no sign Kyiv ever seriously considered it.
And it seems it didn't escalate too much. We read that two unnamed Ukrainian officials said the whole thing didn't even reach, like, the highest levels of leadership.
Correct. And one source specifically mentioned being unaware of any, quote, political demands from the U.S. about taking these deportees.
Okay, so what was the official U.S. line on this?
The State Department gave a statement basically saying that constant interaction with foreign states is extremely important for deterring illegal and mass migration and ensuring the security of our borders. Standard practice, you could say.
But on the specific Ukraine proposal?
They referred questions about that specific proposal to the Department of Homeland Security.
And DHS.
DHS didn't comment, according to the article. You know, state handles the diplomacy, DHS handles the actual border security and deportations. So that division makes sense.
Right. So this Ukraine proposal, it seems, was part of something bigger.
It looks that way. The documents we reviewed suggest a broader, sustained effort by the U.S. President's administration, really since taking office, to get more countries on board with accepting deportees who aren't their own citizens.
And how were they trying to achieve this?
Well, the interesting part is the strategy. It looks like they were offering incentives, maybe promises of better relations with Washington and things like that, to get these agreements.
And we saw examples of this working.
Yes. Several Latin American countries are mentioned: El Salvador, Mexico, Costa Rica, Panama. They all apparently agreed to accept third country deportees.
And that article detailed some of the interactions, like with El Salvador.
Exactly. The president of El Salvador apparently got a White House visit. And there are reports of the U.S. paying El Salvador millions of dollars, specifically for housing deportees. It looks like a pretty clear quid pro quo there.
But it wasn't always carrots, right? There were sticks, too.
Seems so. The reporting suggests some countries faced, well, significant pressure. Panama, for example, was allegedly threatened with the seizure of the Panama Canal.
Wow. That's heavy pressure.
It really is. And Refugees International apparently observed this pattern, suggesting the administration targeted countries may be looking for favor from the U.S., or perhaps those seen as more vulnerable to pressure.
It raises questions about the different tactics being used in these negotiations, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Now, bringing it back to Ukraine for a moment, the sources note the U.S. president had previously shown a willingness to use Ukraine's reliance on U.S. military aid as leverage.
And there were tensions reported.
Yes, apparently peaking in late February during a talk between the U.S. president and the Ukrainian president.
But things eased off.
The article suggests they did, after Kyiv apparently agreed to some U.S. demands. This included, interestingly, an agreement giving the U.S. access to important Ukrainian minerals.
So maybe the deportation idea was just one piece in a larger diplomatic puzzle with Ukraine.
It could well be. We see the financial incentives with El Salvador, the potential threats with Panama. It seems diplomatic leverage in other areas, like the mineral access with Ukraine, might also have been part of the playbook.
The documents mentioned other countries too, right? Rwanda.
That's right. The administration apparently sought and got an agreement with Rwanda, a country, it's noted, with a history of human rights concerns, to take deported third country nationals from the U.S.
And there's money involved there too.
Quite specifically, yes. The U.S. reportedly paid Rwanda $100,000 for accepting just one Iraqi deportee last month.
Just one for $100,000.
That's what the source indicates. And there was apparently a further agreement for Rwanda to accept 10 more deportees, different nationalities, under a long-term program.
And there was that comment from an American official.
Yes, noting that Rwanda's leadership seemed quite eager to promote the America First foreign policy idea, suggesting maybe an alignment of interests, at least from the Rwandan side.
And Georgia was also mentioned.
Correct. Negotiations were reportedly happening with Georgia about transferring third country nationals. But the documents we saw didn't make the outcome clear on that one.
So taking a step back, the article really stresses that while dealing with other countries on deportations isn't new, these current efforts feel different.
They do. The sources describe them as distinct in their scale and just the nature of the approach.
What specifically makes them different?
Well, things like the variety of agreements, some may be temporary. Also, the very clear something for something principle, the quid pro quo, and just the amount of money potentially changing hands.
And the timing of the Ukraine proposal is also relevant here, early in the administration.
Yes, it coincided with the U.S. president's stated goal of getting a peace deal. And also remember, concerns were being expressed about the level of aid Ukraine received from the previous administration.
It's also mentioned, kind of paradoxically, that the new administration was thinking about rolling back rules that let Ukrainian citizens stay in the U.S.
Right, which seems on the surface a bit counterintuitive alongside asking Ukraine to take other deportees.
There was a quote from a Ukrainian diplomat, too.
Yeah, basically saying, look, Ukraine knows how to handle its own citizens being deported back, but dealing with the realities of wartime is a completely different ballgame. The needs are just immense and different.
And finally, former U.S. officials apparently called these specific deportation talks with Ukraine unusual.
Yes, described as not really part of routine diplomatic back and forth, which underscores just how exceptional this particular proposal seemed to be.
So putting it all together, these documents paint a picture of a very active, maybe even unconventional, push by the administration to find more ways, more places to send third country nationals through these various international deals.
That certainly seems to be the key takeaway from the material we reviewed.
Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.